we have turned the switch on. This is a space for conversations around leadership, decision-making in the system that keeps the lights on. I am Julieta with Electric Power Engineers, and I'll be your host. Today, I am joined by Juliet Shavit, my name twin. She's president and CEO at SmartMark Communications. Juliet works at the intersection of utilities and customers, helping organizations communicate, build trust, and engage people in how they use energy. Juliet, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. To start, can you briefly describe your role today and the kind of work you do with utilities and customers?
Sure thing. For about almost 2 decades at this point, I have been pretty vocal about the role of consumers in the electric grid. Traditionally, when people think about the electric grid and how it functions and resource availability and sort of the dilemma that many of the engineering world is thinking about in the electric space, they're not really thinking about customers. You know, customers tend to fall into like a customer group, like a marketing group, sort of a different group than the folks that think about the grid. And I have been really focused on thinking about customers as part of the grid. And as we talk about end-to-end flexibility of the grid, what role do consumers play, particularly as they own many of the grid assets behind the meter that are becoming increasingly more important to resource availability. And so I've been really focused on helping utilities think about their customers in 2 different ways. One, in terms of the grid itself and the flexibility. And so when we're doing systems planning and load management strategies, what role do customers play? But also in terms of thinking about the customers in terms of, as you said, trust, engagement. How do we achieve the perfect balance between building a trusted relationship with our customers and one that's going to last for the foreseeable future, particularly as flexibility and load become increasingly important topics in the industry? You know, how do we build that trust to make sure that they come along the journey with us and are not just sort of bystanders on the side?
Yes, I really like that answer because I'm an engineer, you know that. And so I have to be reminded myself, right? The whole reason we do this is because of the customers, right? And I always like to share that I got hooked on working on this really when I realized that this was such a big system that had to be balanced second by second so that as the customers, we would have power available at all times. But sometimes the customers themselves also, we take it for granted, right? But it is the way it's supposed to be. We don't think about how the system works. We need the power to do our day by day. And it's not optional, right? It's something that we depend on. And it comes with a tremendous responsibility towards the customers too. And so I was going to follow up by asking you, when did you first realize that the work you do and bridging that gap also has real consequences also, that if you do it wrong, people would feel it?
Oh, it's a great question. It's one that started, I think, when the first AMI meters started being put out in the field and continued as recently as Distributech of this year. So I'll start, the 15 to 20 years ago when the meters went in. I was in my world in telecommunications networking, to be honest, doing a lot of work with carriers and operators that were building next generation networks and talking about many of the things that we enjoy today, like voice over the internet and mobile and the future of mobile technology. I did a lot of work in that space originally. So I was used to working in a room full of engineers, working with acronyms and technology they didn't understand. And I got a call one day from Navigant Consulting, actually, who was at one of the large utilities. And there was a dilemma. They said they wanted to bring me in. They were working with a utility who needed to learn how to translate into English what they were doing from a technology perspective. They said that there was some issue with customers, like in the industry, and I didn't know what they meant. And it turns out that in Berkeley, California, when the first meters were going out there was a great uproar, and that uproar was unanticipated. Nobody predicted it was going to happen. People just thought, what do people care if their meter is getting swapped out? They never cared about their meter before. Nobody predicted people like going to the streets, the sort of internet backlash, people really very concerned over radio frequency and the connectivity aspects of the internet. And this utility was just about to do a massive deployment, hundreds of millions of dollar deployment. And they were terrified because what happened with those consumers in California was that the actual implementation was stalled. So the entire investment was stalled because they need to take a step back and talk about the customer. So I was brought in by this utility and they said, hey, we don't know what to do about customers. Like, this is complicated technology. It's networking. It's going to help us improve our operational efficiency and do our metering. And the first thing I asked was, so what are the benefits to customers? And no, I was shocked to find out that no one had really thought about that. And I said, okay, well, if you're going to bring customers in the conversation, then I think you need to think about those things. So I think that was the first time that I really was exposed to the impact of the role of customers in advancing the grid. Really, at that point, they couldn't advance the grid because they couldn't figure out how to engage consumers. Now, more recently, customers are playing a more significant role as people drive more electric vehicles and people put solar on their houses. Consumers are playing a more active role in the grid. And I went to Distributech a couple weeks ago and I had to go through a metal detector and a wand. And I was like, what's happening here? I was joking to the guy at the security. I said, do people really hate their utilities this much? And he said, yes, we do. It was in California and they do. So this is a real issue, between, and I want to bring up a point that I've been thinking about for a couple of days leading up to this, which is that there's always this saying in our industry, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, which is nobody wants to be friends with their utility. That was like an excuse that was given. People would say that in the room, like nobody, when we think about the relationship between the utility and the customer, nobody wants to be friends with their utility. And I've been thinking about that a lot the past couple of days because I said, why can't you like your utility? Is there something precluding us from liking our utility? And I think that is sort of where we are right now. Like, if customers really don't trust their utilities and really don't like their utilities, then they're most definitely not going to engage with their utilities when utilities need them most.
That is so interesting. And we'll go back to that. It does remind me of an anecdote that a colleague in the industry shared. Back in Europe, she said, an unrelated, a friend of hers, unrelated to the energy industry, friend of hers said she was moving and she was switching countries. And what she was most sad about is that she was not going to have her electrical utility anymore. And my friend that is in the industry was like, wait, what? Tell me about this. It's the first time I hear somebody having a relationship like that with an electrical utility. And so there is something to learn about that experience. And I think we can go back to that when we talk about the communication, which is something I think it's critical that a lot of times is missing. But what do really customers care about, right? But because it's not just communicating for communicating when you don't care about what they're telling you, it's like, what do you actually care about that? So we can maybe go back to that. But before that, I was going to ask you the other way around. So we are talking about how important it is for the utilities to think about what is in it for the customers. But the other way around, what is the public maybe sometimes also wrong about how the grid operates? Why, and if so, right, why does that gap exist? And how do the customers perceive the system that we can maybe do a better job at sharing with them what's important?
I mean, I think the truth is that most average people don't think too much about the grid at all. What do they know about the electric company? That they don't think about it because their lights turn on and everything's working. They really, do only think about it when something is not working or when there is an impending blackout happening or a brownout. But I would also say that now, in particular, affordability is becoming a huge topic, if not like the biggest topic in our space right now. So people are thinking about the rising energy costs. I live in the Philadelphia area. We had a horrible winter this winter. It was the coldest on record, and as there's been a lot of talk around electrification and all electric, and honestly, the cost of electricity during those winter months was pretty high, and in the summer as well, we had a very hot summer. So, with prices going up and people getting more and more concerned about their energy bills and their quality of life, I think that this is a really important time to be thinking about that messaging between the utility and the customer, the value proposition, but also incentives. I have been around a lot of programs lately that question whether incentives are even, valuable. It's unfortunate. There are a lot of providers out there in the current market that are going to utilities and offering advanced, VPP solutions and technology solutions, and they're not building customer incentive into the strategy. And that's a miss, it's a miss. So, really thinking about this topic at a holistic level. Okay, well, we need customers to charge their EVs during off-peak hours, right? We need people to be installing batteries so we can have less congestion on the grid. Okay, those are big asks of people. Why would you not incentivize them in some way? But that incentive is tied very much to satisfaction. So I think that there needs to be a general effort within the utility to sort of absorb what's happening around affordability, think about what's happening in terms of grid flexibility and resource planning, and really be bringing both sides of the utility together, both the customer engagement side, the marketing side, the satisfaction side, with the grid planning side.
That's critical. I like to always be in advancing that integrated planning, right? Breaking down those silos, because we are more and more planning the grid that needs to be operated, and those customers are part of that solution. Might you have an example of a program or an incentive where it was the success stories for the customers that, they felt engaged and they felt that there was something in it for them to participate?
Yeah, I have a great story. I don't know if I can mention the utility yet because the results have not gone to the commission, but it's a great story. So I'm really interested in smart home, very interested in smart home. I sort of fell into it by accident, to be honest with you, when one of the energy companies I know was rolling out a security solution, and I was surprised why they had framed it as a security solution versus a energy management solution. So I fell into smart home, realized that I have an Alexa at home. My friends have Google Homes, and realized, these are really easy ways to manage your energy at home, but they're also tools for enjoying life at home and playing your favorite music on these things, watching your favorite programs. I just recently went to a hotel this weekend and the whole room was smart and cool. Where can you intersect like this cool lifestyle with energy management, right? I've been really interested in that. So we decided to do a demand response program that used smart home systems. And this utility was very brave and decided to trust me, I guess, and say, okay, could we develop a situation where the utility, with consent from the customer, of course, managed their smart home system and allowed these customers to save during peak periods. And what's even more interesting is that the original design of the program was to have the event during peak events. And the third-party evaluators came in and said, actually, do you mind doing daily load shifting? The commission's asking about it. And I was kicking and screaming against it. I was like, no, we're not doing daily load shifting. That is too much for people. I really don't want my little baby pilot to be, affected by people like hating their utility because we're adjusting it every day. But we did an incentive-based program, and we actually included a lot of low-income customers as well. So we added an incentive to the customers. We were given, a total of like $50, I guess, for the entire year. And we decided to allocate dollars as appropriate to incentivize behavior for daily load shifting. And we did. And it was an enormous success. It was an enormous success. First of all, the evaluation of the smart home technologies was very high. because rather than traditional traditional demand response programs generally have one device or two devices involved, a thermostat or a pool pump. We were able to do whole home. So by talking to the system, we could talk to the whole home. So we had customers with 39 devices in their home connected to this response event, which is
That's fascinating.
It's game changing. It's game changing. So we were controlling a house with 39 devices in it during a peak event. The customer had control. There was an app that the customer had, and the customer could choose whether they wanted to participate automated or manual. So there was a demand response component, but they also could also participate through a behavioral program. So if they had like a little switch and they said like, don't touch my, we called it automatic and manual, which was a signal to the utility, don't touch my things. I don't want you to, but I'll do it myself. Customers responded. They would get an alert. They responded to the event through their system, their smart home system, and they reduced. And so we saw very high energy savings during the events, both in summer and in winter. And then we had huge customer satisfaction rates because customers felt incentivized. They felt that they had control, and it was really one of the best professional experiences I've had since I've been doing it.
That sounds really exciting. Yes. And that reminds me, right, the importance of meeting the customers where they are, what's important to them. So you mentioned an app.
Yes.
And it reminds me of a story that somebody shared at one of the recent industry events where a professor, I think in Denmark, created an app that was free to show daily prices. And in a week, suddenly the entire country had it, 99%. Nobody had, no program, no rollout, no anything. It was just somebody had put it for free, and it got really popular because it had really good interaction.
Yeah.
Customers were understanding that resonated with them, right? Price. That's what ultimately changes every day, right? Every hour. It was, I think, what was being shared. And unexpectedly, they had created something that had so much. So I was thinking, right? A big part of the success is the customer also had advantage probably in that app, in that engagement, in going by their daily day and operations, right? They saw something that they could engage with.
Yes, and it was a way for them to communicate with their utility also. This was a new way to communicate. This little something as easy as a button that you could toggle on and off was a signal to the utility. So they didn't have to call the call center and opt out of something. They didn't have to go through some crazy online web portal, where they had to like disconnect. They literally were like, yes, I'll participate. No, I won't participate today. And we did see changes. Some people participated sometimes. Who knows? People had friends over. They didn't want to have their thermostat adjusted during that period. But that's human behavior. And so, yes, there is no person today that doesn't have dozens of apps on their phone today, right? Clearly, that's a sign that customers want to be engaging in these types of platforms. And, I would also, say this may be controversial, but, during the AMI deployments, there was a lot of money being invested on customer apps. And those customer apps had a lot of things thrown into them from a kitchen sink perspective. We had like outage management, billing, payment, and processing, right? AMI data. It's a lot to take in for a customer, right? That's where education comes into play. Like putting an app with everything in it, almost maybe too much into it that the customer doesn't know how to navigate or want to use it, is also something our industry, I think, could do a little bit of a better job on.
Definitely. And I think we can switch now. You were mentioning earlier, you had a really tough winter in Philadelphia. So that made me think of the question of, is such a big, important, critical system to our society. Where do you think the system might be more fragile that we might like to admit? And not just from a technical perspective, which is important, but also in terms of this conversation of building the trust and the customer understanding that might have, worse consequences that we might think for the system. if we don't take it into account.
Sure. I mean, I think everyone in the industry is talking about data centers, right? And the surprise that's probably going to await us when we start to see an increase in them. We're only at the sort of the seedling time of like the data centers being, conceived and built slowly to address like AI's need and things like that. But those builds, those data centers are pretty real, and they're going to go up pretty fast, and they're going to be sucking capacity pretty fast. And so I think fragile in terms of there's a lot of aging infrastructure out there. So I think there will be communities that have challenges. I also think that EV charging still is something of an enigma for this industry that we have not really quite figured out how to address. I see it being addressed in a lot of different ways. But given that infrastructure maybe was not fully deployed during the IIJA rollout and there was an administration change, right? We're sort of left with some difference in political views. We have different, sort of technology that has many companies that have gone under, honestly, in the past year or so that were supporting some of those investments. So I think taking a step back from that question, I think as an industry, we have a challenge right now, right, on our hands, which is how do we reconcile a future that we don't quite know, right? What technology is the holy grail here, right? Because, there's a lot of different solutions to trying to deal with load. I do think, maybe it's just my lenses that I wear, but I think that having a moral compass that turns back to the customer is not something that's going to go out of fashion. Technology is going to go out of fashion. Politics is going to go out of fashion, right? We're going to switch political views today and tomorrow. But understanding the role of customers and energy and the fact that our number one priority is to provide safe and reliable electricity to consumers, that's not going out of fashion anytime soon. So I think one of the areas that I spend a lot of time on is challenging the industry to rethink the grid actually itself and where it begins, and to sort of like start with the customer and then paint that picture backwards, and see what do we need to make sure that we keep people's lights on, that we keep people part of the conversation, to think about their buying trends. Okay, so if we're talking about future of energy, I just mentioned smart home. Every device in your home these days has a Wi-Fi chip in it, right? I do a lot of work with some of the appliance manufacturers, all that have smart connected appliances. We need to be thinking more creatively as an industry. We need to be thinking about consumers. We need to be thinking about those industries that we've been very protective as an industry, right? We're like an old boys and girls club, mostly boys club, right? But let us girls. But like we've been a very protective industry. We don't like third parties in it. We use the word security a lot. But as we move towards the grid edge and we really talk about flexibility and edge computing and distributed intelligence and sort of like the future of the grid, that's a cloud-based area where a lot of people could play, right? And a lot of companies could play. And I think we as an industry have to be open to evolving to meet those needs. We're not evolving fast enough, to be honest with you. So I think our greatest barrier is fragile nature, or to answer your question, is we are stuck in the muck in terms of as an industry. We need to be more willing to evolve to meet consumer demands the way other industries have succeeded, and leaped ahead of us in terms of engagement and even technology innovation. And I think we need to do that collectively. So not in place of the security people. We need them maybe more than ever to make sure that those clouds are protected, but we cannot keep the gates too high up. If we do, there's some risk involved with that.
Definitely. And now I think you described it really well. The system is becoming more complex, but there is opportunity also in that the technology and the innovation is really happening. And I sometimes, on the less positive side, I sometimes say, how can I be doing this image with AI? I think I was doing as a joke in a conference, I did an integrated planning image where cats and so kittens and dogs and squirrels, they were all planning the grid. And it was a really funny image, right? I was like, how can I just do that? But at the same time, in a utility, we still have a hard time, for example, handling data, knowing what the state of the system is now, getting cloud-based. That requires now we are at the point where we might be lagging a little bit behind, and we really to change a little bit the way we think. And I like to challenge us engineers. We are risk adverse. We like to plan and within our security boundaries of the way our engineering roles work, right? But we do need to become comfortable in testing and letting some of the innovation and the technology support the complexity of the grid system now. It is not the same one that it used to be. So there was a reason why we did the way we did. But we do need to all, I think, collaborate a little bit more and be more comfortable.
Absolutely. And I would say that, again, going back to the customer, I guess that's, again, those are the lenses, those are the glasses that I wear. People are different. Energy patterns are different. So if we're talking about managing complex data at the edge, right, we're talking about edge computing now in real time. We're talking about behavior patterns. There is the engineering side of you, right? The engineering side of our industry should be thinking of customers as edge pieces, right? I don't want to call a person a device or a grid asset, but like people are part of this grid and people are complicated, and we can't treat behavior the same way we can treat an inanimate object like a battery, right? People are, and so, and people will change, and weather patterns will impact people changing. So if you talk about the adoption of the AI, spending more time learning behavior patterns and understanding and forecasting the edge of consumers could be very, very helpful in helping design meaningful programs, incentive-based programs, right? Where people can become part of this. I do think that there is no world in which we cannot bring consumers with us on this journey, right? I just don't think we should be making the same mistakes we have in the past. We've made a lot of them as an industry. Why repeat them? Today, especially with affordability, and especially since customers can close their doors on the utility and say, no, you can't touch my assets. You're done. I don't like you. I'm going to charge my vehicle whenever I want. Leave me alone. That's my vehicle. I think that there is enormous, I don't want to sound doom and gloom. This to me is a huge, huge opportunity for our industry to finally really learn from other industries where customer satisfaction is super high, where people do appreciate their service providers. I think, I came from telecom. I watched the transformation of telcos, right? That used to be these big, mammoth, like Bells of the world, right? The Bell Souths of the world, these giant monopolies. And I watched them get chopped and dissected and turned into cloud-based, mobile operators that provide video content on your phone, right? What a massive transformation. But they did that because the market's competitive. And if we continue to see a stagnant industry where our utilities are not moving, and we have really smart hyperscalers with data centers and their own generation, how could we not be looking at a future where maybe the competition is something we really hadn't anticipated? I think that might be our Achilles heel, drinking too much of our own Kool-Aid and not being really open to like what's happening around us.
That's a really good point. So to close today, and on the optimistic side, what gives you confidence that as an industry and that even as customers, we will adapt? And what keeps you optimistic about the industry you're working in, the future of energy?
I'm really excited. I did not come here to paint a doom and gloom picture. I came to paint a picture where I think we need to be aware of what's happening around us. But this program I just told you, this smart home program, where customer satisfaction and energy reduction were both achieved with the same goal in mind, gives me a lot of hope. I'm talking now to companies that are historically technology driven and not customer driven, and they're calling me and saying, we understand the customers are part of this conversation, and how do we do it? So the willingness to listen to that, to prioritize that. I've been talking to regulators, and regulators equally are open to understanding. The opportunity is all ours, to be honest with you, to educate the stakeholders that need to be educated on what we need to be doing to make the case for more creative solutions at the edge and how to secure those solutions. But honestly, I'm very lucky. I don't know if everyone can say this, but I love my clients and I love the utilities that I work with. The utilities that I've been working with, and they're not small utilities, are incredibly brave right now. They're being innovative. They're willing to invest in true innovation and customer experience. I'm seeing more of that, and that's very exciting to me. That is not our industry 10 years ago. This is CEOs who are coming up and saying that customer satisfaction and customer experience is as important as the technology investments that we're making. That's an exciting world for me.
Absolutely. That resonates a lot with what I've been hearing, along with that word that you mentioned earlier, affordability, right? Bring the customers along and keeping affordability in the forefront. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. Thank you for the conversation. And thank you, everybody, for listening. The Switch is produced by Electric Power Engineers, and we are turning the switch off until next time.